Now, my dears, before the dreadful seance that is our main event, I've gathered you all here to tell you a horribly gruesome story that is sure to get your spines shivering. It all began a long, long time ago when Morticia Addams, the fine madman, was living in the French countryside. The townspeople called him Loup Diable, for on every full moon he would transform into a ferocious, bloodthirsty grey wolf, terrorizing those foolish enough to wander into his dark and murky forest. Only one woman dared to make her home in his domain, for she was a spiteful and ruthless old woman, hell-bent on destroying his peace, all because she simply did not understand his genius. Now, this woman had a family that lived within the town's walls, a daughter who adored her cruel mother to a fault. And this daughter had a daughter of her own, you see. A little girl, unreliable and selfish, who often struggled with properly following orders. The old woman's daughter was so fixated on her mother that she decided to send her own daughter off to certain death by commanding that the girl transport a basket of unhealthy sweets and ineffective medicines through Marcel's forest on the very eve of his transformation to her grandmother's house. She told the child to stick to the path laid before her and not dawdle, playing with the woodland creatures or cloying wildflowers, in hopes that perhaps the girl might, against all hope, make it back alive. So, basket in hand, the girl set forth into the dense and terrifying forest. This child was known as Little Red Riding Hood, for she obsessively wore a cloak her grandmother had made for her that looked as though it had been stained with the blood of many innocents. The clasp that held the garment tight to her throat was a pure silver brooch, sharp and deadly, in the shape of a dagger with a gilded handle. At first, the girl traveled on with no conflict, passing easily through the forest. But as the moon began to rise, she could feel the hair stand to attention on her arms as a scream of pure agony and transformation ripped through the trees. Marcel had begun to change. On she raced down the path, but in her abject horror she stumbled and found herself veering away from the moonlit trail into the inky blackness of the canopy, tripping and falling over gnarled roots and shrubs. She came to rest for a moment, out of breath, under an ancient oak. Alone and very frightened, Little Red Riding Hood felt tremors rise throughout her body as she stared into the distance and saw him, the grey wolf, Marcel, his eyes reflecting like two coins in the night. He could smell her. He was surely coming for her, she thought. But, you see, Marcel was no monster. Not so much as to eat a poor, defenseless girl. He approached her slowly and spoke, asking her to where she traveled on an unfortunate night such as that. When she told him, gasping, that she only wished to bring her basket of goodwill to her grandmother's house deep within the woods, Marcel retreated, allowing her to go along her way. This was the final straw for Marcel, you see. That woman had prompted too many others to trespass in his forest, and he intended that it end immediately. Much faster, on beast's feet, he made his way to the old woman's cottage and burst through the door. "No longer will I stand such impudence," Marcel cried. And when the woman sought to fight him off with her meager weapons, he gobbled her up in one miraculous bite. The woman was large and fatty, quite the unfit meal for a werewolf, and so, exhausted, Marcel thought to lay down for a moment in the old woman's bed before returning to the wild. There, he crawled under the blankets and attempted to rest, but only to find he was interrupted by the arrival of Little Red Riding Hood. Feeling a sudden shame and remorse for his act of vengeance, the vengeance that had taken this little girl's grandmother from her, he thought perhaps he could fool her into thinking her family well and leaving without a fuss. As the child approached the bed, she called out to the form therein, wishing her grandmother a good evening. Marcel, ever the gentleman, responded in kind. Then, much to his surprise, the child proceeded to insult not only the look of his fine ears and eyes, but his hands and enormous mouth. This was too much to bear. Child or no, she was certainly the same sour sort as her grandmother, and so Marcel swallowed her up as well, doing the world a great favor by disposing of two cantankerous women in one night. But such a meal was far too much, and Marcel found himself asleep in no time, with both of them tucked away in his large belly, as he dreamt of wonderful carnage and torturous misdeeds. Little did poor Marcel know, but the townspeople had finally put into action a plan to displace him once and for all, and had sent that fateful night into the woods a huntsman to murder the magnificent werewolf. After hours of searching, there, in the old woman's house, the huntsman found Marcel, fast asleep, and like the coward he was, he took out his shears and cut the defenseless Marcel from navel to nose in one fell swoop. Out poured the wolf's entrails, all manner of blood and innards steaming and grotesque. Still very much alive, the ungodly old woman and her granddaughter clawed their way out from the wolf's stomach, further defiling his corpse, until they had completely escaped. Together, the trio of fiends dragged Marcel's remains back to the town square, where he was hung unceremoniously from the boughs of City Hall for all to see just how barbaric and violent the citizens were. Little did they know, however, that as his rotten flesh and tainted skeleton swayed in the breeze over the town, a curse was laid upon them all. And there, in that very town even today, a child is born every 100 years who, when the moon is high, will transform into a most ferocious grey wolf. Ah, do you hear that? It's time for the seance to begin. Come along now. We mustn't keep Marcel waiting.